So this chapter we're going to talk about the media and politics. I've mentioned a few times before how important the media is. It's crucial to understanding politics, to understanding how politics works. You have to be critical of media. You also have to be constant in media. It is something that you should start kind of putting in some like sort of daily thing to just get on some sort of news or have it emailed to you. One of the things I would highly recommend, the Daily Skim. I don't know, does anyone have the Daily Skim? Daily Skim is a news, it's like a news website app sort of thing. It sends me an email every morning, and it's all of the news of like the day before in very short, like little paragraph spurts. It kind of gives me a sense of like what's going on, but I don't have to spend a ton of time. And they email it directly to me. So I would definitely recommend the Daily Skim if you're looking to put some more like news in your like daily routine. It will be very helpful to you in the next few months as primary season starts to come upon us, as the candidates will start to drop out, other candidates will start to rise in the polls. It's something that you might want to take a look at as far as something to add to your daily routine. So your book is going to talk a little bit about some of the ways that politicians use media, and they give you a couple of examples, which is really nice so you can kind of see how they use it. So the top one is Barack Obama has been kind of known as the candidate that's used social media more than any other candidate we've ever seen. He also uses it a lot as president. So this is an image of a Twitter campaign that they did during the session or the term in the legislative branch when they were looking at the Affordable Health Care Act and sort of trying to get people to understand some of the pros to the Affordable Health Care Act through social media. John Boehner also goes on the other side there, though, and uses Twitter to sort of bring about his side of the argument in some of those things. And so you start to see social media websites becoming more partisan and affecting more voters. And so you have to kind of take all of this with a grain of salt and understand that social media is one of those medias where people can say whatever they want, whenever they want, however they want, and it doesn't necessarily mean that anything has been fact-checked, approved, verified in any way, shape, or form. Which is one of the misconceptions in social media, is that politicians are going to write it in a way that makes it seem like it is, legit. However, no one has to approve any of this. So you have to be careful about some of those things. Okay, so we need to talk a little bit about what media is, how we're going to define media, and then we'll talk a little bit about the history of how media has come to be in the United States. Media, the definition we're going to use, is the means of communication. It's just a means of communication, such as radio, television, news outlets, that reach or influence people widely. Okay, I'm going to say that again. Media is the means of communication, such as radio, TV, and news, that will reach or influence people widely. One of the things one of the gray areas here when we talk about media is media the, paper that you write that you show to people? Is that media? Is it your local newspaper? Is it the Wisconsin State Journal? Is it the New York Times? Where does it become media? And really the way that we define that is if it reaches a wide audience, it's considered media. So the paper that you write that two people see, not really media. It's definitely something to look at, but it's not going to be considered media in our eyes. We have what's called true media. This is just general public media, TV, news, radio. And then we have a new form of media in the last 10, 15 years, which we call social media. And social media is Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Its main purpose is to connect people. It is not to inform people. So make sure you understand the difference. Be very careful when you write in a free response question. If you're going to talk about social media, do not tell me that social media informs people. It does that, but it's not always legitimate. The reason candidates or campaigns or politicians will use social media is to simply to connect themselves with groups of people that they may not be able to connect, to be more personal, to show a different side of themselves. It's a way to connect. It's not necessarily a way to inform. Sometimes you can be informed, but you also have to understand that sometimes that information can be sort of biased. Okay, the rise of the popular press. So really when we talk about the history of media, we're talking about newspapers. The newspaper industry was the main channel of information for a great number of years, especially when it comes to campaign politics and how campaigns are run. So there's this mass readership of newspapers. Roughly 3,000 newspapers are being published in 1860, which is a really big deal. The thing we start to realize about popular press and things like that is that we have what we call managed news. And managed news is where information is generated and distributed by the government in such a way to give government interests priority. So one of the things that the newspaper started to do is become very heavily reliant on managed news. They would publish whatever the administration wanted them to publish. It's just the way that it was in press back then. So when we talk about things like Franklin D. Roosevelt and how he had polio, but most of the country didn't know about it, it's because his administration isn't publishing stories about how he can't walk. They're publishing stories about all the things he does, and the media at the time picks that up. It was way more important to pick up that managed news rather than find that sensational kind of gossip sort of news. So what we start to see is this evolution from a managed news sense to this yellow journalism. And so as newspapers become more widely known, as they're trying to continue to keep readership, they start to adopt this idea of yellow journalism. Yellow journalism is a term for sensationalistic, irresponsible journalism. It's finding the juicy stories. It's digging deeper and finding the stories behind the stories. It's reading between the lines. It's investigating pieces. Sometimes it's talking about things that at the beginning people wouldn't have talked about. Personal lives, personal relationships, drug abuse, alcohol abuse, affairs, things like that start to become a huge part of our popular press and yellow journalism, and it continues to grow today. One of the things that's really interesting is if you study like presidents or other popular politicians, they had a lot of this sensationalistic activity. JFK has been kind of widely known as having many mistresses in the White House, but it wasn't something that the press felt like that was their place to get involved. Now everything's up for grabs. The amount of money President Obama spends on a vacation, the amount of money his wife spends on a dress she wears to a dinner, the amount of times they leave the White House, the amount of times they purchase something new, redecorate the residence. All of that is up for grabs. All of that is up for criticism. It becomes a very difficult thing to live with because there's nothing hidden. There's nothing off limits. So we see the popular press move into television and the rise of television. Later on this week, you're going to look at one of the most important pieces of the use of TV in politics, and that was the Nixon debate and kind of how much that was influential when we got to actually see politicians on TV and how that really affects how people vote. And then electronic media, radio, television, and then finally the internet. And all forms of these media must be leveraged to run a successful campaign now. So every time we add a new facet of media, the campaigns have to figure out how to do that. So a modern day campaign such as the one that we're seeing today has to manage social media, the internet websites that they hold, all of the radio broadcasting interviews, all of the television interviews. There's a lot of media to sort of manage now that we have so many different outlets. This is just an example of what kind of changes after we go from radio and newspaper to TV. Eisenhower is sort of known for, he doesn't do a news conference very well, and so he would videotape them and then he would send them out. He wouldn't live feed them, and part of that is because he took a lot of takes to sort of be the guy that you wanted him to see. He was really uncomfortable in front of the camera. Again, you have to realize that now, at that point, it's not something that they're very used to. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about some of the electronic media and some of the things that we're seeing today. So selective information processing. Well, one of the things that we've seen as we see electronic media grow is that you have the ability to only see the things that you want to see, which is what we call selective information processing. It's for an individual thinking about information that's really needed and disregarding the rest of the info presented. You can get online, you can turn on the TV, you can even flip through a newspaper sometimes and find these stories that support your views and never read a story that doesn't. You can go ahead and only get news presented in a way to you that you will always agree with. It is becoming much more common to see people have an everyday news source like Fox News or MSNBC or even Comedy Central. They just did a poll last year about young adults and where they get their news. The Daily Show is one of the top 5. One of the things you have to realize about The Daily Show is that it's not a news organization. It doesn't produce news. It parodies news, it analyzes news, but is not considered a news organization. Please, please, please be careful. Think about where you're getting your information. If you are conservative, is it a lot nicer to listen to Fox News every day and agree with them? Absolutely. But is that really what politics was meant to be used for? To only hear the things that you wanted to hear and not have to, sort of grapple with the other side? Yeah, it sort of depends on who you talk to. But if you're talking to me, I'm definitely going to tell you that it's just not the way that politics was supposed to be set up. So when we see selective information processing, we see narrowcasting. Narrowcasting is where you present information on a very regular basis that is skewed to one side or the other. So again, to a small sector of the population. And they're becoming really popular. They're not going to go away anytime soon. And in fact, there is a worry that your children will grow up in a world where the nightly news will no longer be around. It will simply be turned to your station, because it's a 24-hour news cycle, and pick up what you want to hear. We also see the rise of talk show politics. Talk show politics are very similar to things like The Daily Show or things like that analyze news. They don't necessarily give out news. These are things like Jon Stewart, Stephen Colbert, even Jimmy Fallon. They all are kind of considered talk show politics. They talk about politics, they don't really inform you on politics, and maybe when they are informing you, they're doing it because they're trying to get a laugh or trying to show something going on. Hopefully, I've been kind of watching what's going on in especially The Daily Show. I'm trying to see if I can get, this week, try and get you a story that they talk about in the nightly news and a story that they talk about in The Daily Show, kind of show you kind of some of the nuances of that. And then talk radio. Talk radio is actually on the rise. Thank goodness for the hipsters who love talk radio, or else I would have died. Actually, about 10 years ago, talk radio was really kind of on the fritz. People didn't really listen to talk radio, now it's becoming more. So this is NPR, this is WPR, but it's also things like Rush Limbaugh has a talk radio show, Glenn Beck, Rachel Maddow, And these are people who get on the radio and they analyze media, but they're partisan. They're geared towards a specific group of people. They are still narrowcasting. And then we see the impact of social networking, blogging, and the internet. So blogosphere politics is something we need to talk about really quickly. Please be careful when you find political blogs. You know this, I don't need to tell you this, but blogs are never approved by any credible source. You can write whatever you want, click publish. Oftentimes it looks very professional. Blogosphere politics is actually pretty common in the world of Washington politics especially. And it's an online arena where politics and comments of bloggers can become news. We see the rise of podcasting. Podcast is a method of distributing multimedia files for downloading on mobile devices and personal computers. There's a lot of podcasting in politics now. And then obviously Facebook and other sites that were originally intended for personal use have soon become major advertisers for companies, but also as well as the political world. They have a very large impact in social networking. And the Obama administration kind of goes down in history as the first administration to use social networking on a bigger scale and kind of leveraging some of that to do some campaign work, earn some money, things like that. One of the most famous pieces of history in media, this is Walter Cronkite telling the country about the assassination of President Kennedy. It's kind of one of those historical media clips that we have. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about some of the functions that media has. Obviously, these are pretty commonplace to you and you understand them, so I won't spend a great deal of time on them. Media's number one function you need to understand is entertainment. Media only survives when they entertain you. If they don't entertain you, you're not going to come back. They won't make money, okay? So even the nightly news is entertainment. They're only going to cover the things that are going to bring in viewers. So understand that every time you look at the media, you have to take a critical eye to it and ask yourself, are they showing this to me to inform me or to entertain me? There's a very big difference here. We also see network dramas use politics as entertainment. Shows like The West Wing, which I'm going to show you an episode of that at some point this week. Also shows like House of Cards have found a way to take politics and make it entertaining, make it sensational, make it something that is interesting to look at. Now, is it accurate? Not really. Are there some pieces that are definitely accurate? Yes, absolutely. But you also have to understand that it's entertaining. It's entertainment. Next is to report the news. You'll notice that no matter what network you watch, there is usually a nightly news program. I would encourage you to take a look at some of them. Some of them are better than others. It sort of depends. CBS in the last 10 years has really stood out. They really have kept a lot of their news reporting segments, 60 Minutes, CBS Sunday Morning. They also have a nightly news. Also, their morning show focuses a lot more on news stories, whereas like the Today Show does a lot more of the entertainment stories and things like that. So it just sort of depends on the network that you look at. Next, media identifies public problems. But the thing you have to understand is that what we call a public agenda is decided on by the media. So they make you decide what you care about. Even though you don't want to, they do. They decide what you care about. And they do that by highlighting something over and over and over again. One of the best examples of this is what's going on in media right now. I watch the nightly news almost every night, and about 3 out of the 5 nights, there is a story about an unarmed person who was shot by a law enforcement person, a police officer. Now, did that just start happening? No. Is that something that is like an epidemic that's come over law enforcement now that are greedy and blah, blah, blah? No. The media has decided to highlight it 3 out of the 5 nights for the last few months, and now it is a big deal. It's not that it hasn't happened before. It's not that it wasn't a problem before. It is just that media has decided to pick it up. There are so many issues in our social world that we have that may even be bigger than this law enforcement story. But if the media doesn't pick it up, it doesn't become an issue to us. It's not a problem. So the thing you have to understand is that media will try and sway you in specific ways. They'll also try to make it seem like a bigger problem. You know, one of the things that bugs me about this law enforcement story is that I grew up with a police officer. My father served a police officer for more than 30 years. Did he ever take his gun out of his holster? Once. And that was because a rabid animal was coming to him. Okay, so this image that's being portrayed of a specific group of people, because 3 out of 5 nights of the week we find the one guy who gets a little, stir crazy in his new law enforcement job. Is it an accurate portrayal? Absolutely not. And you have to understand that. You have to take a very critical eye to it. The problem is that 9 out of 10 people don't do that. 9 out of 10 people take a look at that. They say, well, 3 out of 5 nights tonight they've talked about that. That must be a really big deal. And law enforcement must be really terrible people. That's just how it is. It's just the way it is. Socializing new generations. Obviously, the media is a new form for lots of young Americans to turn to for entertainment, finding increasing amounts of social and political information on the internet and social media. It allows you to find people who share your same ideas. It allows you to connect to people, to campaigns, to politicians, things like that. It does provide a political forum. What we mean by that is that candidates for office use news reporting to sustain interest in their campaigns. And office holders use that media to gain support for their policies and present an image of leadership. Obviously, this is, it makes or breaks people. Donald Trump is where he is today because of his incredible ability to manage the media. I'm going to show you a clip. I was watching a clip yesterday morning. CBS Sunday Morning does this, they do a little clip of an opinion piece, and this journalist highlighted the fact that in almost every speech that Donald Trump gives, he criticizes the media. He points out all the TV cameras and tells the audience how terrible media is, and media still covers it. He's figured it out. He's figured out even the way to criticize somebody who continues to keep coming back to him. And the reason he does it is because media can't go away from him. They can't shut down their TV cameras because they won't get viewership. So he's really figured out a way to kind of play both sides, which is really interesting. And I'll play it for you sometime this week so you can see what that argument is about. And then making profits. One of the goals is to make profits for expansion, for stockholders, for people who invest in campaigns is a pretty big deal. Media itself makes a huge profit. They're conglomerates. They own a ton of the media buy-in. Lots of them own a lot of the channels that don't even have their media title on it. Things like that. Okay, television and political campaigns. So this is a really big deal. Political advertising can work to inspire supporters and encourage them to share their views with others. It's increasingly important for the profitability of television station owners. Political advertisements, they're going to be everywhere in a number of months, so enjoy the normal commercials now, because come October it will just be campaign advertisement after campaign advertisement. Managing of news coverage, we call this spinning the news, making sure that the news talks favorably in terms of your candidate. There are teams hired for this in candidacies, teams that will be there to spin it. Things like they spun a story the other week, I think it was Friday or Thursday, I watched the news. Donald Trump had sold 20,000 tickets to a rally in New Hampshire to a stadium that only held 6,000. Can I tell you that again? He sold 20,000 tickets for an event that only holds 6,000 people. So there's this line down the block, and his team is fantastic. Someone in his communications figured out that might be a bad story, that Donald Trump sold basically almost 3 times as many seats as he could hold. And so what they did is they bought a bunch of boxes of pizza and they walked down the line and gave everyone a piece of pizza, and they had the news coverage follow the people who were giving out pizza. He spun it. He spun it from what could potentially be a really bad story to, look at that, you get free pizza when you stand in line for a rally you're never actually going to get into. So they find ways to spin the story to make sure that the story always comes out in their favor. Those are called spin doctors. They do that a lot after debates. So campaign debates are a huge way for political campaigns to gain leverage in the TV world. They don't have to pay for it, which is awesome. When you get invited to the Republican, candidates debate, it's awesome for candidates because they don't have to pay for that. It's free coverage, essentially. The media conglomerate's going to pay for that. And when you're done with a debate, then all these spin doctors come out on the floor and they'll answer any questions that the media has, and they'll spin it in ways that they want to spin it. This is one of the most famous political advertisements. They call it the Daisy Girl ad. It's like this little girl and she's counting these petals, and then all of a sudden this atomic bomb drops. And it's really odd and interesting, but it's one of the most famous advertisements. You're going to take a look at a bunch of them in an assignment, I think, next week, so I won't give it all away. This is one of the political debates in the 2012 election between Mitt Romney and Barack Obama. There we go. Internet campaigns. So political campaigns began using the internet for promoting their candidates during the 2004 election. That would be probably the first one. So I'm going to let you go through all of these examples when you read about them a little bit more, but obviously the 2012 Obama campaign just built off of what he had built in 2008, 2009. It was huge. His social internet campaign earned him like millions of dollars just simply by having like a pledge sort of happen online. And the nice thing about internet campaigns is that they're able to micro-target. And what we mean by micro-targeting is using a demographic and consumer data to identify individuals or small groups of people to receive specific advertising messages. Raise your hand if you've Googled something like twice, and then all of a sudden those ads that come up on the sides of your social media stations all have to do with that. Yes? No? Yes, thank you. I'm not crazy. So like something like I had to look up something about my engagement ring for my insurance policy, and now every time I turn on the internet, it's like, oh, look at this ring, look at that ring. It's like, I don't need this. This is not, but they've micro-targeted me. Somehow they've collected, well, not somehow, I know how they've done it. They've collected the data of my Google search. Things that you search in Google, by the way, not private. Everybody's like, they can take that data. They watch how many times you Google, I don't know, what day is it, or I don't know, something like that. Yesterday, or the other day, I have a friend in San Francisco, and I was trying to figure out when I should call her, so I Googled what time is it in San Francisco, and now I have like, are you traveling to San Francisco? Here's a great deal to fly to San Francisco next week. I don't care, but that's what it is. Google takes all that information, they spit it back to advertisers and other social media outlets, and they micro-target you. For campaigns, I don't know, if you get on a campaign website a lot, lots of times you'll see that campaign advertised to you. They're only going to advertise to the people that are actually interested in them. They're micro-targeting. The media's impact on voters. So what happens when media hits you as a voter? What are some of the things? And we have two specific things that will happen here. We have what we call selective attention, which is the tendency for individuals to only pay attention to information that reinforces their held beliefs. So rather than media helping you decide who to vote for, really all that media does is confirm who you'll be voting for. And part of that is because the media is super unreliable about giving you very straight information about both sides at the same time. Usually they give you one piece of information from one candidate, and they won't give you something from the other candidate. And so really it kind of encourages that selective attention piece. The question is there a good impact on undecided voters? We haven't really seen, it says candidates and their campaign managers have long thought that media have the most influence on those people who have not formed an opinion. But it is unclear, it's really uncertain to tell if it really, impacts an undecided voter in a really strong way. We do know that it gets people talking. The media campaign that a candidate has is important to getting the word out and just getting that conversation going. If they have like a really interesting ad, if they have a really interesting campaign thing, I guess. Okay. This will be our last note for today. How does government control media? It's a really difficult thing. It's getting harder and harder to do. The media and the executive branch is really the kind of center hub of how government interacts with the media. At the White House, there is a permanent press room, and there are permanent press members. So they're called the White House Press Corps, and they are reporters from specific news organizations that have been put there, and that is their job every single day, to go to the White House and to be briefed on what the president is doing and what government is doing, and to sort of monitor what's happening. The thing about media and the executive branch is that each needs its other piece to survive. The executive branch will never survive if the media doesn't cover what the president is doing, and media will never survive if they don't cover what the president is doing. They both need each other. We know that stories about presidents and their activity and their their agendas and things like that are really important. The political staff for the White House aims for a constant and positive exposure of the president. There is at least one daily briefing to the press every day at the White House. It's really only going to highlight the positives. It does often highlight some of the challenges that the president is facing, but they'll try and spin it in a way that he can handle it and everything's going fine. This is done by a position in the White House called the press secretary. I'm going to show you a West Wing episode where they interviewed lots of the press secretaries of former presidents, sort of talk about what that looks like. FDR goes down in history as the president who was able to control the media the best. Media loved him. He knew them by their first name. He made them feel really comfortable. He invited them into the Oval Office often, which is something presidents didn't do a lot before him. And so they wrote a lot of positive stories about him. He did a great job. Also, his fireside chats was a really good way to get media in his back pocket. And they set the public agenda. So media has an important part in setting the public agenda. They point out issues, and they suggest what issue is of importance. That's what we call priming. And then framing is the presentation of that issue by the media. It influences how audience understand it. So priming is sort of the way that government is going to present a news story to you. Framing is the way that that media picks up that and then actually gives it to you. And sometimes there can be a great divide between how the government has primed the news media and how it's actually framed in the end. Again, government's always going to try and prime it in a way that it's just normal and it's okay. Media needs to prime it in a way that it's entertaining, something that is important. So I'll get a simple example of this is like the Benghazi reports. It's primed by the government as this is a terrible mistake, but it happens and we're really sorry about it. The media frames it as this is a huge injustice that's been done to these people. Obviously. And then investigative reporting. The results of investigative reporting can have a very large impact. Example, Watergate. Watergate was just simply a story that was investigated to try and figure out what was going on. The reporters that did Watergate had absolutely no idea what they were walking into. They were simply reporting on a burglary. They had no idea that the president was hiding behind it. And when that story broke, it put them on the map, essentially.